Everybody. We're really glad you guys could be here and taking time out of your day so that we can kind of discuss this topic. It is anxiety, which is something that we see quite a bit with students in general. And part of that is because it is a very normal emotion. It is things that we get whenever we are feeling that there's a test that we're going to take, or something is really important to us, or things that it lets us know that there is that something is valuable to us and we need to work hard for it. And that causes anxiety. And at that point, it's normal. It's healthy anxiety because it drives us to hopefully do better. Anxiety in general is this nervous feeling that we can get when it comes to, and sorry, as I'm going through this, I know Kelly's trying really hard to navigate our screen at the same time as I'm talking. And so since we're not in the same room together, she's having to be like a psychic, and where it's kind of difficult. But I'll go over how we're going to go ahead and run today's session. That'll probably be a little bit easier and clearer. So first, we're going to go over a little bit about what stress and anxiety is. Then we're going to talk about ways that you can best support and manage that anxiety, especially when it's normal, healthy anxiety at home, to help kids to be able to learn those coping skills to manage their way through it. And then we're also going to talk about when to know how to get help, or whether you should get help or not, whether this is healthy and normal anxiety, or whether this has moved into something that requires more professional help. So we're not only going to help you to figure out how to get those resources, but also how to know when it's time to do that. So, and then we'll have time at the end for questions, obviously. So what is anxiety? Anxiety, as I was kind of describing earlier, is a very common experience for children. It is something that we see a lot of, and it is something that parents probably see a lot of, and it makes us uncomfortable as parents to see our kids having to struggle through just those normal day in and day out things, giving a speech in class, worrying about PE and how that's going to work, how they're going to get back and forth to class. These things all cause normal anxiety in our kids, hopefully. And as adults, we have those same things. If we're going in to talk to our boss about something that we're concerned about, it's normal to have some level of anxiety when it comes to that. Anxiety, it's like a fight or flight response. It's letting us know whether we need to do something about it or whether we want to run away. And so at times that can get out of hand, and we've got to be able to distinguish whether this is something that is normal or it's good or bad. So we have good and we have bad stressors. And for kids, a lot of times when it starts to move into that bad stress, it becomes catastrophic. They start to think about the worst case scenario of what's going to happen. And so as counselors, a lot of times that's what we spend time talking with our kids about, is trying to put that in perspective and to really look at what's the reality of this situation versus are we catastrophizing that situation and thinking worst case scenario. So the good and bad stresses, I think, are on the next one. Pretty sure. So good stress versus bad stress. Good stress, right? It's that thing that motivates us. Like I said, it motivates us to go ahead, and that we know that we need to study for that test. We had a healthy level of anxiety or nervousness, so we study a little bit harder. It's that we know we want to make a sports team, so we go ahead and we practice a little longer and we try a little harder to do that. We know that something is valuable and important to us with that anxiety. It encourages us to deal with challenges, and as parents, being able to also help encourage that, yes, you're going to have anxiety, but that is helping you to deal with a challenge and to overcome that challenge. Anxiety helps us, good stress helps us to increase strength and speed and stamina because, right, we feel the pressure of something looming on us. And when we're at a healthy level of anxiety and stress, it helps us to rise up and to feel empowered when we're able to accomplish that thing. And good stress typically happens when we feel like we can handle the situation that we're in. We feel like this is something that we've either seen before, or we feel like it's manageable. Bad stress, we start to see kids feel overwhelmed, adults feel overwhelmed, maybe shut down, not able to overcome things, not to feel like they can overcome things. They sleep too much, maybe they're not sleeping enough. Maybe they're lying awake thinking about ruminating, thinking about really bad thoughts and worrying about the day, so they're not able to fall asleep. Other kids use it like a coping skill. They sleep a lot, so that way they can kind of avoid what's happening. Eating too much or too little, I think as adults, we know about that when it comes to bad stress also. And then stomach aches, you can see physical ailments in kids a lot of times when they describe when they're dealing with bad stress or unhealthy levels of anxiety. And they start to get those physical symptoms like stomach aches, headaches, they feel jittery or shaky. They start to feel impatient because they just want it to get to a place that they can feel comfortable. And then it decreases their strength, their ability to have some grit to be able to overcome a situation. So I know that on the next slide, we've got a scale, which kind of talks about, and I think it's a really good visual for being able to see how healthy versus unhealthy anxiety or good stress versus bad stress happens. So as you can see, there's the side that pushes us, which is the green. It focuses us, it motivates us, it lets us know that something's important and that we need to try harder to accomplish it. And then we get up to that peak performance place, and that's great. That's that nice spot with anxiety and good stress. And then the other side is when we start to see those unhealthy characteristics, things that at that point start to shut us down, start to make it so that way we don't feel like we can function within the level of stress. So that fatigue, panic, this is where panic attacks might come in, and you might see some of those. Burnout, you might see your kids shut down, get so overwhelmed that they are unable to function. Maybe avoidance, a lot of times avoiding school, avoiding situations, avoiding friends. And so that's kind of what you're looking at with that. Anger is also a big one that you can see. I'm glad that that's in there, because anger is one that can show up in teenagers especially, and in boys it can be something that is really just anxiety, but it is this overwhelming feeling, and so there's a boiling anger or this agitated feeling. So, and then I think, Tanya, it's yours now.
Okay, so now we're looking at just some developmental considerations for when you see anxiety, when anxiety is normal, and when, to kind of think, oh, maybe this is something I need to talk to, a medical professional about. During infancy and preschool, it's pretty typical, about 7 to 8 months old, we see those little ones when they have anxiety to going to people they don't know, or people they see for the first time. So all these situations create those similar kind of symptoms, but again, just real typical things that we see developmentally. Around 12 to 15 months, those are the fun times where you'll see that your little ones are afraid to kind of separate from you or from someone that they have been with for a while. So those first times going to Mother's Day out, or just going to visit other family, or maybe going to a preschool, that's where you'll see some of those situations play out. And then around 2 years old, we're looking at a little more in depth of like fear of strangers, being fearful of new situations where they take a little time to warm up and acclimate, being exposed to animals for the first time, you might see some reactions. Being afraid of the dark usually comes up around this time. Anything with loud noises, a fear of falling, or fear of getting injured when they're seeing other activities and seeing other children play in them, and then seeing that they have the potential to do so, and then maybe hurt themselves as well. So those are really developmental things we see during infancy and preschool. Once we move up to school age, up to age 8, when the anxiety continues, we see, just these preschool things kind of play out based on what, they're exposed to at school, and what they're comfortable with, what they've been exposed to at home, and things like that. The concept of anxiety actually becomes more abstract and social. So then we see it with friends, and it's playing out with, will this person like me? Did I do something to upset them? Are they going to accept me? Am I doing all the right things? Do I like the things they like? We start to see a little bit worry about just like the future with school, with new things, new situations they're going to experience. And then we really move into adolescence, where we see the worry shift, and their shift into more sexual issues, religious issues, moral issues. So all those things that we see during puberty, and just independence and learning about themselves, and where they're going forward, and things they see, again, like in the news and the world today. So we see all these worries pop up during this adolescence time as well. So what are signs of anxiety? So we have this chart here to kind of break down how they play out. So with thinking and learning, we often see them as concentration problems. So difficulty concentrating on completing tasks, sometimes difficulty remembering things. You might have asked them to do something or some routine they've always done, but you see kind of a breakdown and all of a sudden attention problems. So being able to pay attention to what you're saying, focus, simple requests, things like that. Sometimes we see these anxiety play out with problem solving difficulties. So being able to problem solve when something comes up, whether it's school, peers, problems they've been able to solve before, then all of a sudden they're getting stuck and not understanding how to work through them. And then we also see them just with worrying about things. Behaviorally, what does that look like? We see, just fidgeting, possibly talking fast, being a little irritable, restlessness, possibly being withdrawn. Perfectionism is also something that pops up during this time, just the drive to be perfect in something and not accepting anything else but perfectionism. Sometimes it can be the reverse, lack of participating, so not feeling motivated, failing to complete those tasks, and then just seeking the really easy things because they don't want to get into something that they feel that they cannot accomplish, and the worry about it is overwhelming. Physically, the signs of anxiety, we see stomach discomfort, increase in heart rate. You can see a flushing of the skin, possibly increase in sweating, headaches, really tense muscles. And then a lot of times this will play out with sleeping problems. So they're having difficulty sleeping. And then sometimes it even presents itself as having an upset stomach or nausea. And then this slide has a great quote here. And if parents and key figures in a child's life can help the child, assist them to confront their fears and learn how to problem solve, then it is more likely that the children are going to develop their own internal coping mechanisms for managing their anxiety. So this is key to actually having the child deal with the situation themselves. So this is just a wonderful quote as a reminder that our role as parents and as key figures in a child's life is to teach them the skills to problem solve and then to allow them the space to practice those skills. Because if we don't allow them the space to do so and actually practice them, then they're not actually, being able to develop the skills and then the coping mechanisms that go along with that by doing it each time. And so it's just a really good reminder. And then on the next slide, we move into helping to manage anxiety. So a lot of good recommendations here. So avoidance is not a long-term solution when trying to manage anxiety. What we're trying to do is eliminate the anxiety rather than to learn to tolerate. The goal is not to eliminate the anxiety, but rather we're learning to tolerate it, and we're going to teach them skills that help them function as best as they can. So while initially it might be great to avoid something short-term, it does, if we keep that as just the long-term plan, it does enable the anxiety to come back and they don't actually, face it and are able to tolerate it. So that's not something to do for a long term. We want to express positive but realistic expectations. So we want to express confidence in our child's abilities to be able to manage situations. We want to respect feelings without empowering. So I know you're scared and that's okay, but I'm here to help you. And then you want to try to avoid leading questions. So instead of, are you feeling anxious? We want to say something about, how are you feeling about this today? That way they're giving them the opportunity to express how they're feeling. They're able to name and label those feelings, which is all part of that process in developing that tolerance to working through anxiety.
One thing I wanted to jump on and add in about how are you feeling and like checking in. I know a lot of times we hear from parents, especially of teenagers, when you ask, your child, like, how is your day today? Or how are you doing? You get kind of that vague, like, fine. And you don't feel like you have a whole lot of tools in your toolbox as to kind of get more information from them. So using tools such as like scaling, you could ask, what emoji do you resonate with today? How are you feeling today? Show me an emoji form. Or are you going to use some sort of gift, something that they can kind of relate to a little better? Or even if you're using from like a scale, for a younger child from like 1 to 5, 5 being like the best I can feel, 1 being like the lowest I feel, where am I at? With an older child, teenager, you could try from a scale of 1 to 10. So getting kind of creative with how you engage in some of those feeling questions today, because a lot of times our kids don't necessarily have that awareness to know how to describe what emotion they are feeling. So just trying to draw and strengthen that skill set as well.
And then continuing on this slide with tips, encouraging coping with anxiety. generally, as we face whatever the stressor is and talk through it, the anxiety does drop. It might not be immediately, and it might not go immediately down to zero, but there is a reduction in the feeling of anxiety, and then eventually it usually does resolve itself. And so that's why we want to continue to encourage to cope with them. Keep anticipation period brief. So an example, so we want to avoid a discussion about some impending situation that's creating the anxiety. So if there's a doctor's appointment, we don't want to give them hours ahead of time to have this discussion. So then they have those hours to just sit there and worry and fret about the situation. So we want to limit that time before that situation that you're an anxious situation that's coming up and you need to talk to them about it or prepare them about it. We want to do that in a shorter time frame. And then think through the solutions. What would happen if that came true? How would you get help and what would you say? So we want to make sure we're again teaching the skills and then modeling the skills about, you know, what their worries are. So, you know, what would happen if this happens? So that way, a lot of times when you talk through them, they realize, okay, well, that's not so bad, or gee, that's something that's probably not realistic. And then if you are in that situation, how would you get help? So again, helping them think through, okay, I'm in the situation. These are probably some things that I can do to reach out to get help, or I could possibly do this. That way they're armed with just some suggestions and they feel like they have some ideas of how to face something and they have some control in the situation. And again, just role modeling, what are some things you could say and what are some ways you could, you know, ask for help or ask for, tips to get through this kind of situation. And then, of course, all of this goes towards modeling healthy coping skills. Their kids are very perceptive. And so when we're as adults in situations and we're handling things that pop up, they are watching. So how we manage stress, and if we're able to do it in a calm manner and in a healthy way, they're watching and they're picking up on those things. So again, yet another way to extend that learning by doing it and practice as we preach. And then on this next slide, we have 5 tips for stress management. So this is a real quick slide that we found from Children's Health that I think is just very important and just kind of showing 5 real quick tips that you can do and practice each day. We want to check in with your kid regularly and just kind of see how the day was, what was great, what was, not so great. Help them identify and reduce whatever sources of stress that they might mention. Obviously, sleep is crucial in that. We want to make sure that they're improving sleep and they're getting the amount of sleep that they need to be able to function the next day. And then we also want to practice stress management techniques. So with stretching, meditation, exercise, taking walks, all these things are stress management techniques that, once they practice at home, they can then use at school or out, in the environment, in the work world, wherever they end up. And so they're the skills that you teach them will be lifelong. And then, of course, in planning, to stress management, we want to make sure that we're having schedules that aren't so tight where they're running from one thing to the next. And so leaving room in there for relaxing and decompressing is important as well. So when should I seek help? So while not all children will show signs to the same degree, a stable pattern that you see that's interfering with their performance of their daily life, daily functioning, is usually a general time to kind of reach out and ask, for what's, some assistance or what do you think's going on. So consulting with your pediatrician or your medical physician, and just kind of, bringing up the topic of what you see and what you're worried about. And that's a good guide for, starting that conversation with them to see if there's something you need to look out for. Generally, you want to watch out, just for real excessive or just things that aren't really typical for that age or developmental reactions and things that just behaviors that might keep reoccurring. Those are things you'd want to mention. Any kind of inappropriate or excessive for the situation reactions or things that are happening on a frequent basis. And then something that's going to persist for several weeks or months. So if we're talking about a few things that happened, a couple of days or, a week or two, that's probably something just to kind of file in the back of your mind. But if you're seeing something that's persisting beyond that, we definitely think that's something you might want to reach out and just consult with somebody to see if it might be, something that you might need to get some assistance with or support with for them before we're at the reaction stage of, when it's gone on for 5-6 months down the road. So just some good tips there.